Alrighty. Okay, so thank you for joining. I realize that it's nice outside, and you're attending here in the hopes that we can share some really great intellectual property. I do want to just share up front that potentially you're doing work with us. We are industry leaders within DevOps, CI/CD, DevSecOps. I didn't want to focus too much on benchmark today. It was more about highlighting Jenkins capabilities, enhancing your experience with it, and then sharing a little about CloudBees as well, where it can help you with your pre-existing Jenkins environment. So we're also going to do a demo. I have a distinguished engineer on. Many of you already know him. Matt Cole has joined us. He may have helped some of the customers on the call today. So his stuff is always enlightening, and we will share that. For those that stay to the end, we will share a Git repo. Just as we did like within the Vault session that we had previous, Jenkins and Vault. Today we're going to cover Terraform, Packer, and some really good QA automation within the context of Jenkins to reduce your burden. But I want to first talk about where the industry is going and where the challenges are so that we can make use of those enhancements and talk about how also CloudBees builds upon your base that you have that may be a little too much burden today, but we're hoping that we reduce it. That is what we're trying to achieve and going to share. So with that, I'll jump in. Let's see here. Okay, so what we're going to try to do here is we know that DevOps is a challenge. We know that in many cases, organizations don't really get to where they want to be, and we're coming in and saying we're going to try to help you, give you content that you can use to enhance your Jenkins pipelines today so that you get to a non-event in the sense that things just occur and we maintain them, which will also attract a talent pool because you're going to reduce your burden. You're going to move towards a growth mindset instead of everything's okay the way it is. So I wanted to just touch on the personas that's very common in the enterprise. And as we go through it, Sunil, jump in as you need, or if there's dialogue, ask Q&A. I know that not everybody's on audio. There's too many people to turn on audio. But if you have questions, shoot them out, and we'll be happy to answer them as we did within the previous sessions. I wanted to share where things are going, especially if our persona is coming from the United States, which is a little ahead of the Canadian market. I'm sharing where things are going so that you know the challenges you're going to face and how we can help. So if you look at it from a developer perspective, there's a lot of DevOps motion going on in building out competency, but the desired state is to commit code. If someone asks from a DevOps perspective, what does a developer want to do? They want to commit their code because that's where their core competency is. As you shift from infrastructure and ops towards SRE, which is a more product-oriented, customer-facing, availability of services mantra, you want to be confident stewards of production that interact better with the developers. And your core competency is operational excellence. You know how to keep things running. You know how to keep things going. You know how to onboard people. You know how to operate environments. There's also changes that are happening within the security space. The invention of application security teams. Their desire is to manage risk, and their core competency is governance. So I wanted to share, I can't animate here, so that's fine. The hats do fall on the developer. We don't want to do the anti-patterns of what a dev-centric shift left is. We want to show you how within Jenkins you can incorporate the needs for operational excellence and the needs for risk being managed, not just from a code perspective, but from the domain expertise of the resources, so that development don't feel extreme pressure to deliver things that other teams are accountable for. So I just wanted to cover that because this is happening in many organizations today, and if we can incorporate the needs and build them into a common platform, such as Jenkins or what CloudBees does with their software automation platform, you're going to get teams coming together that are independently facing threats, not direct threats, but they're feel threatened by what other teams are doing, or the interaction model is poor because somebody's closing the door because you're a security person trying to manage risk, but you're not seeing the needs met, so you stop people. We're going to try to solve that and share that today, where we're going to really work on converging of capabilities. So I share this so people can see where security is going. There is a convergence also of security groups. where there's a practice building out around governance and bringing together cybersecurity, information security. I'm just trying to give some preamble to before we get into the direct content. And then the understanding that site reliability engineering doesn't remove the need for development or operations. It's just a method for everybody to come together with their abilities to deliver an environment that's stable for the customer. And that's their focus, is the availability of services and the improvement of stability. Now, what's really cool and what we're going to show today, and what it's going to be demoed with Matt, is essentially the on-demand environments and application delivery converged. What's essentially happening is CI/CD application delivery is not in a silo separate from infrastructure delivery. It's extremely important to bridge the silos. Don't tear down the silos. The silos will come down naturally after you bridge them and teams are working together. We do this somewhat well in Jenkins, better in CloudBees because it has a much better governance model. And will also reduce the total cost to operate because teams are supporting each other. You're not independently running stacks. Like you don't have an application stack that's independent of an infrastructure stack. They can converge if we work together and show you how to do it using the archetypes that we're going to share today. That's the market direction, is the convergence of application delivery and infrastructure automation. Okay, and one of the main things that we're going to distinguish here, why Jenkins and CloudBees are really cool, is automation and tools in themselves can reduce or add toil. What I mean by that is, let's say I buy a particular tool, but I don't have something like Jenkins or CloudBees orchestrating it. I'm going to add burden to the team to manage that tool. But if I orchestrate it, I can actually take away the toil. So our intent today is to show you a repeatable building model in Jenkins so that you can reduce the toil within the team, either doing QA challenges, infrastructure automation, or application delivery. We're going to share with you what that looks like and give you some artifacts post session. Now, I wanted to touch on the culture because there are those that come in and say, you know what, don't ignore the culture. It's really important. DevOps is not the culture that I'm pushing for. It's software engineering practices. You want to cultivate them. Software engineering has always had these practices. It's just morphed into the word DevOps. But in reality, all you're trying to do is remove the need for a SME to be a hero. So if you separate the SME's domain expertise from the actual delivery of value, and you have an orchestrator between the two, they're going to focus on self-development. They're going to focus on improvement. You're going to move away from heroes, and then the burden will slowly, continuously reduce because you're out of the cycle where you can't get out, where you're dependent on people constantly, and you know what I mean? You cause attrition because no one really wants to be the hero more than a couple of weeks. It puts a burden on the team. I didn't want to spend too much on this, but we're going to show this archetype, but the importance of it and the demo that Matt's going to do is more about how do I build Jenkins pipelines as code? How do I do cross-domain orchestration artifacts and template library? And I'm going to let Sunil talk to that, because that's more of a domain or cross-domain capabilities that would help teams share and build out that confidence of operations and trustworthiness for the security team. That we'll get to. Sunil, you want to comment on that?
No, it's absolutely true, right? So you don't have, change is hard regardless, right? So if you are in a mode of just doing what you need to do, it's very difficult to say, look, I'm going to try and use pipeline as code, or in this case, try and do or utilize the true orchestration capabilities, of the platform. But when you're starting to implement the practices, like you said, true pipeline management across domains, it becomes one of those standardized things where you can then let the developer become or do what they do best, right? Which is develop code. So plenty of options that commercial software like CloudBees CI provides versus the open source models, right? But we can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get to how you can build upon where you are, but our intent on this call is to share with you stuff that will reduce your burden so that you can then look at what is next. There's no way you can look at what's next if you haven't reduced the burden or that's currently weighing on the team. So that's what we're doing across our customers today. And that's what we're really focusing on, is move failures outside production, bring app teams to infrastructure teams, remove deployment calls, the need for them, remove the need for making reporting can be incorporated, remove the need for watching dashboards, remove maintenance windows, or build towards the maturity where maintenance windows are needed. Again, the intent, the outcome, spending time with your family. Although you may have too much of them during COVID, which is my circumstance, there are times where I want to spend the time and I can't, and that's the circumstance that we're trying to solve, and COVID can't be forever. So I'm looking forward to giving you that.
Very true, right? Lots of people spend weekends doing deployments, right? And the standard issue there is that they start on a Friday and don't go home until a Monday if everything goes well, right? And so we want to get away from that.
I mean, that's fixed. Again, someone asked me, how do you remove maintenance windows and deployment calls? The reality is your customers won't make you do that or force you into those contracts because they see your efficacy. And then they ask you, what they do is you do workshops sharing with them how you're doing it, because your customers want to do the same thing you're doing, to be honest. It's one of those things that if they see you doing it, they're going to want to learn from you.
Agreed.
I did want to show architecturally how we see Jenkins play. It is the core of everything. You don't want automation to burden you. You don't want tools you buy to burden you. The only way to do that is to integrate all of those together into an orchestration, but include the abilities for the teams to work together. You need to include governance. In this case, let's say a governor on top of the orchestrator, on top of Jenkins or on top of CloudBees where it's native. In Jenkins, you have to do it, you have to manage it, you have to build it by hand. In CloudBees, it's native. That's so that teams come together. Security gets the stuff they're looking for. Ops knows the stages that occurred. You're doing a common platform. Everybody can see what everybody's doing to help each other. That's where we want to head you in that direction. I just wanted to share that how the architecture looks when you're doing, really, really good operating models within your organization. We'll send out this deck, by the way, to participants. So if you're trying to do screen captures, because this is super cool, we're for sure going to give you a copy of it anyways, and it'll be higher quality. Really important here, and this is where differences of platforms matter. When you're trying to collaborate teams, I kind of find this is supposed to be linear. This is how we measure. We have our own apps that we've developed where we come in, we measure sweat. I'm going to measure the aggregate hours that everybody spends on a release, even though it might be a weekly release or a monthly release or a quarterly release, but the amount of hours aggregate may be 10 times that. That's what we're measuring, and we're doing that by understanding if you're actually doing all of these stages or are there ad hoc events that are happening to get software released. What's really important is that 3 and 4 aren't skipped, because then ops and security aren't involved. Ops and security can't just orchestrate and automate and get it to production. They need to have defined standards met and then quantitatively manage those standards so that we can improve. From your state, today I may be 4% compliant, tomorrow I'm 5. If I don't measure, how can I go to prod confidently? So this is where platforms like CloudBees add that governance layer to do stage 3 and 4, so we don't just do 1, 2, and 5, which does happen. Look, the ability to go quick is great and it's fantastic, but to add 3 and 4 will incorporate all the bailiwicks of the other domains and their expertise so that you can roll this out company-wide, so that your abilities and your culture spread beyond, because teams will have a different multitude of stage 3 and 4. But if you don't have it, then you can't share it to other teams that need 3 and 4. It can't spread. So we're really focusing here because 3 and 4 is one of those items that we see is very hard, and that's where benchmark comes in, and that's where I think platforms help you adopt these capabilities. Sorry, I'll just close my window there in case you have, I think that was police. Okay. What are your future goals if you do this? I do want to share that before we get into the demo, because I really want Matt to show all the wickedness that we've created. It's going to change a lot. So like I'm sharing where things go once you've started going down this path of convergent app and infrastructure and you don't have so much burden, you could start enhancing things. So you go from a fixed mindset of things are okay and I just do what I need to do, you go to a growth mindset. So you start learning, you start getting self-development, you start doing certifications, You start working on improvements, but it begins with metrics. I'm showing you just a screenshot of, status history of our own services, to be honest with you. We have our own Jenkins. There are some times that they're affected, but we're doing pretty darn good when it comes to availability within our services. And that's what you'll start building out. The SRE team will say, hey, now that we've stabilized on release, I'm going to start building up my metrics that I want to measure myself against. You might not be contractually obligated, but you're going to get to the point where you're going to say, okay, I know where I stand. Here's areas I want to fix. I didn't realize our website had availability problems at 3 in the morning. We fixed it. But because we put those monitors in place and we set an SLA or expectation of always being available, we fixed it. We needed to know it was sizing of the instance in GKE that we needed to improve. So this is where you're going to start going as you start improving your pipeline. You're going to start building new data sets to measure and improve, because that's what we're all trying to do, because that just affects our lives. Okay, so what do I want to minimize? The amount of time you spend on anything. I'll stop, Sunil, if you want to make any. I don't want to just talk to
No,
everybody.
go ahead. No, you're good, man. You've got all the good talking points, and actually, I'm learning more than than I had to contribute, especially until now. So go ahead.
We're almost at the demo. I know everybody's waiting for it, and I know Matt's ready to go. I've seen it. I'm impressed as well. You want to be the king of lazy. What I mean by king of lazy is you wear the crown to make sure that the time you spend on things is to make it, not to run it. So the amount of hours that you spend on creating, or the amount of hours that are because of the stuff you're doing by hand, causes downtime. Human error is the #1 reason for downtime. If you take the human out of the process, outside of the creating of the domain expertise, you're going to improve on your SLA, and you're going to reduce the time you spend on particular items for tasks. Same for errors again, and then effort. I just put all 3 of these into the king of laziness. We actually post roles where we say, if you have the mindset of king of laziness, that's exactly what we want. We don't want you to waste your time on repeating things or being that SME or hero. I'll just cover a tad more. Super important. All organizations start project oriented right now with waterfall. They may have fledgling agile practices, but it's not fully agile, and it doesn't need to be fully agile. You just need to have maybe have a continuous learning and a mindset for everybody. Fix it once. Resilience. Integrate everything. Measure, write, and always test, so that you can bring the ops team, the security team, and the dev team together. In this case, CloudBees as a platform goes beyond Jenkins to actually facilitate that, so that you have a convergence of, well, it was animated in PowerPoint, but not so much in WebEx, the convergence of waterfall and agile, that you'll build your own snowflake. And you're going to bridge those silos. You're going to have an SRE operating model. It's going to incorporate governance, measurements, and things like that, so that, this is my last slide, I promise, so that you get dev zone in code again, and requiring collaboration. You get ops handling operations that handle difficult pressures, reducing that with code. So they take some practices from development, and they interact, or they might even use what development helps them create. The interaction becomes involvement. Involve the operations team, because they're going to be accountable for what you're both, the product that's going to the customer. And then security, yeah, we tip the hat. It's kind of cool. The interaction model is responsive. If you do really well on security, then we want you to treat the pipeline with more velocity. If you're treating it poorly and you're degrading from a delta perspective, if you're getting more and more vulnerabilities, we're going to slow down that pipeline, because you need time to correct what's going on. So it's more of not so much gating, it's more of, can I speed you up if you're doing a good job, and can I slow you down if you're degrading? That's where we want to go. And with that, I want to touch, I think, for you, Sunil, a little, and then we'll pass to Matt.
Sure. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head in a lot of these points, right, Shlomo? Because what you talk about is that layer of development and reliability and governance for your application stack. underneath that is the reliability and governance and scalability for your infrastructure that manages the software factory, right? So Jenkins in this case in particular, and some of the things that we see that don't exist in the OS, the open source model of Jenkins is what you see in the CloudBees CI product, right? Master hibernation, the ability to stand up controllers that can go into hibernation and spun up on demand, right? That's a key factor when you have a large application portfolio that you're trying to push, and you need that scalability and the ability to build, package, test, push, deploy your applications, at speed. Master configuration as code again.
Next is okay. It didn't
Yeah,
animate,
yeah,
so you're covering some of the stuff there. I apologize.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're fine. You're fine, right? So, and sharing domain across teams, like why is this important? You need to be able to create jobs and templates, right, on demand using a code base. You need that standardized approach to snapshot and be able to also recreate masters if that was the case, right? But that latest code from a template being fetched and run every time you need to be able to do that is a critical piece of the puzzle.
I'll weigh in here because I think you need to reward repeatability as well. So teams can create artifacts and put them in templates, but they're completely not reusable for other teams. So stay very much declarative,
Yes.
stay profile driven, and then version your template so that people who pick one, and if you change it, it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
But hugely important to reward repeatability. Otherwise, you get a template library of stuff that no one really wants.
Yeah, and I think role-based access plays a lot into this, right? Because you need to be able to not only provide the developer that flexibility, but you also need the ability to restrict others so that sort of glut doesn't happen, right? So, and there you go, right? So pipeline converter, again, this is one of those big features that comes in with CloudBees CI. It's a central feature, lets you, build your project and combine any of your build systems, right? But then combining that with declarative pipelines is something that becomes a very necessary thing for your developers to be able to leverage that and become more productive, right? Organization capabilities, complex activities that all fall within the scope of as code, right? Plays into this whole game. So it's all about improving the reliability, the scalability, right, of your application or your software factory infrastructure.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Anil.
Sure.
I always like to put an awkward moment for Matt before he demos because he's super awesome. So in the animation, the world's actually turning around his head. He sees it. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt, and literally we want to show you how you can do this yourself, and he's gonna jump in for all of those people that are on our Jenkins SMEs. We're going to get into the deep weeds here to help you enhance what you got, and then share with you content so that you can help enhance yourself. I'll stop. I think you need to share, Matt, yourself. I'm not actually sharing it. It's just a loaded deck.
Oh, I can't actually share. Oh, that's great.
Can we make let me make him change role, make presenter. There you go.
There we go. Yep,
You good now?
got it now. Perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to share this screen. So first what we're going to do is I'm just going to kind of explain our setup because this is where kind of CloudBees version simplifies things. So for our Jenkins environment, we're currently running Jenkins in Kubernetes in order to get scalability. And then all of our agents are dynamic agents, but all those agents need to be defined. So if you try to do your own, CloudBees helps simplifies that. So if you're used to doing like a scalable Jenkins, you'll probably understand this. But I'll show a quick example. So obviously all of our pipelines are in code, and if you've ever did a scalable, you have to define your agent, your Kubernetes agent, and if you have multiple containers within the pod for different different functions within the pipeline. You have to define those all out, and then you have to call those out when you're using that type of container. And that's something that CloudBees, helps you simplify, is getting that scalable environment. So though we have some similar functionality, it was a lot of work to go into making a scalable environment to be able to accomplish some of the tasks within the pipeline. So they definitely help with accelerating that process to get to that point where you're having multiple dynamic agents for multiple runs of different pipelines and whatnot. I kind of broke this down into a few pipelines and one master pipeline. So for example, like this Packer pipeline, it builds a Packer image in Google and basically uses an agent and uses Kubernetes secret to be able to talk to Google Cloud, to build those images. So the secrets themselves aren't stored in Jenkins; they're actually stored in Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes plugin for Jenkins, help achieve that. So this builds a Packer image. We kick it off. There's nothing really exciting about this this one here. It only takes a few minutes to run. We could build now. I'll let it run, but I'm not going to sit here and watch it. Literally, it's a Jenkins file in Git, and then it's Packer configuration in Git. And essentially, when the Jenkins job runs, obviously it pulls down the Jenkins file, it checks out the Packer configuration, and then it builds and uploads the Packer image to Google Cloud, and that runs on dynamic agent in Kubernetes, so within a namespace in Kubernetes. So it will build here. It takes only about a minute to build. It's just a simple Ubuntu image or something along those lines that gets built. The other one here is Terraform. So just the reason I split these out is a lot of teams are still siloed in the enterprise space. So not everyone, like different silos are responsible for different operations within the pipeline. So that's why I split out Packer and Terraform. And the Packer one, what you probably normally do would set a schedule and have that built, every 2 weeks, just so you constantly have that updated image with the updated packages and everything as far as security and stuff goes. So you can set that on a timer, let it build, and then obviously the Terraform would use that image that is built. So this is just some simple Terraform. It's just the compute node and Google Cloud. And same thing, it's just using a dynamic pod with access to Google Cloud, and it will just build a server, and then it will destroy that Terraform when I'm done. And the reason we're doing that is because in a second we'll put it all together with the application, and then we'll show how you could use something like the multi-branch pipelines, where on dev you do this, and once everything's been validated in dev, you're going to destroy the environment, and at the end you're going to promote that to a new branch, and then have the next next branch kick off a new set of plans, and it will destroy. Once that passes, it will destroy the environment, and so forth until obviously you're on your release branch and it goes to production. So that's going to be done in 2 seconds. So we're not going to sit here and watch that either, because we'll go to the other pipeline. But essentially, it is building a machine in Google Cloud, and then it's destroying that machine. And it's like I said, it was just to explain how that's going to work. So we're going to use this. We're going to use this pipeline now. This is where you would put all the things together. So within this pipeline, we have multiple agents for different tasks. So this includes building an environment with Terraform, building a container image, it's scanning, getting the results of the code quality that were part of the artifact build, posting those results to Jira, scanning that image for security using Aquasec, posting those results to Jira as well, and then using Dynatrace to measure the performance of the application. This a little bit if you haven't used Dynatrace before, great tool. What we're doing here is we're actually deploying JMeter, creating a Dynatrace event to show what is running during that JMeter test, so that it can be mapped to the application, and then we'll know whether that application meets our performance requirements or not. If the performance has gone down, has it gone up? We could set it to warn, fail based on how far away from that performance section it is. And then I have security gates. They're yellow because if I fail a security gate within my build here, which I do on purpose, I get an unstable build. You could have it failed. In this scenario, I just make it unstable. So I know I have to fix my security issues because I have some present security issues inside my code. And then I destroy the environment once I'm past that. And then I would promote the code. And like I said, if I had a multi a multi-branch pipeline. Once I promote that code to a new branch, the cycle would continue until I promoted the code all the way up, and it's passed all of my different quality, security gates, metrics, all that jazz. Once it's gone there, obviously I would get to the release at some point. So I'll just kick this off really quick. It takes a few minutes to build the application in the container. So it takes about 6 minutes to build that. And sorry, my computer's slow. And I just crashed it, maybe. Sorry, it's just a demo environment. Give me 1 sec.
If you didn't have problems with your demo environment, Matt, come on,
It's
this would not be a demo.
An underutilized GKE cluster running everything, or sorry, an overutilized GKE cluster. I probably crashed it building the Terraform. It will come back up in a second, most likely, just in a crash loop. Give me 1 sec. Just check it out real quick. Yeah, the old budget for demos isn't that big.
Don't worry, our monitoring service will see it.
Oops. And it should be back up. And that's why I buy CloudBees. Yeah, sorry, this server is
prime example, right? Prime example.
Just got to give it 1 second. They're just coming back up. And just to prove a point, it is oops, I didn't mean to push that behind my screen. It's an overutilized cluster, so you see a bunch of pods crash because we were overutilizing it.
Right.
So we just got to give it 1 second. Don't have enough resources available to do too much.
I mean, I've watched teams go through struggles of just upgrading Jenkins, adding plugins, managing plugins, adding features to the actual slaves so that the slaves can do additional features or add features. So that sort of thing, that lifecycle management of Jenkins itself can be challenging. In most cases, you won't have resource constraints. But in many cases, I've been in organizations where we had a Jenkins build farm, and the build farm was 450 machines, and there was a dedicated shared services team that managed it, or release management team that managed it. But the reality was you're bottlenecking every single team through how fast can I update my Jenkins, how fast can I get plugins. This is where we're coming and saying, hey, we can give you some code that you can use to enhance what you got, but in reality, is it something that is core value to your business to manage Jenkins itself, or could you have it as something as a managed service per se of Jenkins? And don't lose any of the value you have already. There's a lot of teams that puts considerable value and effort into the existing Jenkins, but you want to augment the life cycle of Jenkins so that you don't bottleneck teams as you're trying to enhance and add new technologies. Orchestrate them, great, but who's orchestrating Jenkins? You don't want to have that life cycle burdening the team. I know what that takes. There's a lot of testing that's involved. There's a lot of burden for one team not being involved with the reason for the feature set. For example, if you want to add, let's say, Helm to something, and you need to have something put into Jenkins, you're going to delay the opportunity to go forward, but also you're going to put the burden on another team that's managing that instance for you that's not familiar with your use case. So I want to touch on those items while I give time to Matt, and I haven't started rambling yet, but I may soon. But that is the core of it. Large build farms are a lot of work. Make them impermanent. Find a way that impermanence is not a hard burden or a high burden on your team. And then start adding features, start upgrading where possible, but don't make it a hindrance for your team. And we have some archetypes that we want to share that would help.
Yeah, just one more sec. It was actually Google. One of our nodes actually randomly died. So it was automatically adding a new node due to Google's auto heal features. But the problem was the cluster was already undersized. So losing that one node obviously took everything out. So I'm just waiting for it to provision a new node so that I have resources to do anything. So I didn't kill it by running the demo. Google just magically at the same time decided to fall over.
It happens.
That's the demo gods right there, right? You tempt them. You think your environment's resilient until Google pulls the wool over your eyes.
Until you're doing it in front of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, normally, like in a production environment, like for example, if you were hosting your own, obviously you would have more, you'd have n+1 for nodes, so that if you lost a node, it wouldn't take down your whole cluster. But like I said, it's just a demo environment, so I don't have a lot of resources within it. It's
In
almost
the
crashed out.
meantime, maybe we can shift the Q&A. For those that have watched what we've shown, does anybody have any questions that they'd like us to explore while we wait for GKE to reprovision a node? And we can jump into the technical. Usually it's hard to have top level SMEs available for questions. What would be a good way to back up all of the Jenkins configurations so a new instance could be easily deployed with the previous config?
Good question. So there's a bunch of ways to do that, right? So obviously, if you're using as code, for configuration for your masters, that's one way of doing it. The ability to spin up, a master is very easy now that we're actually, I should say, Kubernetes enabled, right? In other words, the CloudBees CI instance of Jenkins is pretty much a container. So you can use that approach. The configs can be externalized, and so your backup procedures around that could just be whatever your standard backup procedures are. It might be just a repository that you store those configs in and pull them in. But the ability to spin up a container that has Jenkins CI installed in it is actually very easy using a Helm chart. Right?
I'll change the question because the question means you have permanence. So I would actually change it to, if I'm already doing dynamic builds within the context of CI/CD itself, I don't want to keep them. So if you're asking for old configs, every time I destroy and recreate, it's always going to be the same. There is no true backup scenario. Obviously, you want to back up the entirety of the config within some repository. Right. But in reality, when you're following the practices of DevOps, you don't want any of the build machines to stay permanent. You don't want to be upgrading machines by hand and having drift within them. So the build machines are used for the build at the time of the build and then destroyed or hibernating or gone. And if it gets deleted, you're going to build a new one as part of the process of your pipeline to stand up the build process and run the build process. Call for a build process. It'll stand up the node, do the build, create your image or whatever artifact you're creating, and then destroy itself again. So I would just change the response to be backing up. Yes, you should have from the config perspective, but not if you lost a node, because the nodes shouldn't be staying. I mean, in your current circumstance, what Sunil alluded to is correct, but we really want to shift you towards impermanence of build environments because they're a large burden on the team that don't deliver value outside of their actual action when they're running.
Good point.
Let me see additional questions.
Do you have any?
Pop away.
Do you have any
Shlomo,
plan?
there is one more.
One more. Yep. Do you want me to read that out? It says, do you have any plan or suggestion to have a test integration suite to validate all the plugins in a Jenkins environment during every upgrade restart? Well, my easy question to that is upgrade to CloudBees CI because we have built-in plugin manager and plugins that are supported by CloudBees, right? That takes you away from your community plugins where there is that impermanence that comes around community plugins, right? Do I have a test integration suite in mind? I do not, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll
So
just add to a little bit about that. I mean, plugins are great for grabbing a little bit of velocity, but I mean, I try to use plugins as a last resort. So for example,
Yeah.
like within our Jira, we're just calling the Jira native API. That
Right.
way, one, if Jira upgrades their API, we can just upgrade our code instead of having to wait. Like if Jira upgraded their API, you might have to wait for the plugin, the Jira plugin,
To be
for
updated.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and then you're constantly waiting on
Yeah.
the
And so,
community to do updates.
so purely from a support perspective, right, we have two, maybe 300 plus plugins that are supported by CloudBees. And so critical tools like Jira, Git, GitHub, GitLab, TF, name it, right? Any and every common DevOps tool that you can think of is part of our supported suite of plugins and integrations for the CloudBees suite.
I kind of also want to follow the fail fast model here. If you are upgrading things and you're changing the code to reference a new version of, let's say, a plugin, when it builds and the process of building, getting the build available and running the build to build artifact, if it fails, you're going to catch it every time you iterate. So don't, again, look at this as a permanent state. Look at it as your config has changed, which is then going to be a variable that's consumed to stand up and run. And then the test is natural because it's going to function as part of the full end-to-end pipeline, which will find if it's working or not. And if it's not, obviously your test is native to running that function. Again, this is not production environments, all right? Jenkins isn't directly the production environment, unless you're using it directly to deliver prod. But you would test that feature set earlier stages in potentially a different slave. So I just say run the pipeline, just skip the prod stage because you want to validate. Don't run it in the prod stage. Run it in a previous stage if you're using it for integrations that prod uses. I mean, we can switch back to Matt. It looks like you're good. We killed enough time.
Yeah. Just give me one sec. Yeah, so it's back up and running and everything's happy. So the cluster is happy now. So it's got its new node. You'll see everything's green now. Not related to Jenkins in any way. Just like I said, just random occurrence. The only problem is my state file is probably locked. Give me one sec.
Any additional suggestions or questions? Let's see here. Clarifying the background, I have a few follow-up. If there is an instance where we have a master node that has a bunch of agents connected to it, I am focusing more on backing up the configuration of the master node. And by backing up, I mean information regarding plugins and those plugins were set up. So basically the master that makes sure you know what's integrated with it. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more the configs around the plugins, right? And so the assumption is that if a plugin is updated or something breaks within the plugin, that configuration might change. How do we manage that? That's a really good question. I think this is a complex problem to solve. It's not an easy one to just say, just do X, Y, and Z. Plugins differ from different people. You might have different configs coming from different versions of the same plugin from different contributors. So it's kind of hard to say back everything up so that if something happens, you can go back to last known good state. It's not an easy thing to solve, but I do know of people that may have experienced this. If you want to, Ayush, you can reach out to me and I can get you in touch with some of the folks that deal.
Maybe Matt can weigh in. My thought would be you'd want to go find your library, your Jenkins directory, var library Jenkins, and then copy that over to Git, right? And then create a Git, let's say a GitHub job or whatever you're using for Git, and make sure you back it up regularly, and then test that Jenkins job that you're using to back up Jenkins itself. And then you can restore similarly using that and Git. right? Matt, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's two ways to do it. Yeah, you can back up like with newer versions of Jenkins, you can do Jenkins as code and back up, but you can bootstrap Jenkins the XML file for Jenkins with plugins, right? So you can have plugins the plugins that you would normally use. You can actually pre-bake a configuration with those plugins baked into it. So if you had to stand up a new master node when it comes up, like for example, either like I'll just use Docker and Kubernetes for example. When I'm bringing up a new instance, it automatically installs those plugins when it starts coming up. It will like automatically read that configuration file for within the XML file for the plugins and preload those. Well, not preload them, but load them during the initialization of Jenkins.
You just answered another question that was there
Oh.
specifically with regards to XML files.
I was just gonna say I was typing it up, but Matt's just answered it. So yeah.
That's probably the best way to do it, just because like you never know, like if you're gonna have to scale and set up a different instance in another location, then you'll be then you'll be able to set up those instances identically very quickly because they all have the same configuration for plugins. I mean, there's some other ways you can do it, but that's probably the most elegant way of accomplishing it.
And actually putting your XML files in a GitHub repo, right?
Yeah,
For
exactly.
example, is probably the best approach.
So if you move to CloudBees CI, or if I integrate to CloudBees CI, do I have to let go of the option of installing and upgrading existing plugins on Jenkins, or you would maintain that using the 200 to 300 that you have available? What if they wanted to have a plugin that you don't manage? Would you manage that testing, or would that be just ad hoc?
No, that would still be ad hoc, right? The plugins that we manage are specifically to the version of CloudBees CI, right? And so we have the plus minus versioning scheme for plugins and plugin management. And so all of our plugins are tested against our version of CloudBees CI, right? And not against the version of Jenkins OSS. There might be instances where they might work, right? But there's no guarantee, at least from us. So if you do install a CloudBees version of a plugin in a open source, and you end up with problems, it's likely you won't get any support, just to be honest.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would use plugins as a last resort. Like ideally, what you would do is, for most things, is just create use the Jenkins library and create functions within the library that create those tasks you want to do. That way, you're the master of your own domain. So I know it's like a lot of people's focus isn't obviously on like pure DevOps or making sure those things exist. But if you get in the world of 200 plus plugins, that means you're so reliant on plugins that as soon as one of those plugins doesn't get an update, gets broken, it takes down all your pipelines. And once you're in, like if you can have multi-branch pipelines, you could have hundreds of pipelines. Now you've broken hundreds of pipelines. Whereas if you create a Jenkins library for example, most plugins are just API integration. You can literally create a Jenkins library that just calls the API, and then people within their Jenkins pipeline just have to say, call this library and this function, and it will, like, let's say function is create Jira ticket or whatever the name is, and they just have to call that, and it will use the library to actually run in the background or run a bunch of code to actually.
So I'll weigh on that one, which is more of, if I have core functionality that's already within CloudBees CI, they're going to natively give you it. You don't need to manage it. It's cool. But if it's not in there, don't start bolting on additional plugins. Matt's saying go natively to the APIs, building out the library function itself, and then you'll still have all the core functionality that CloudBees is supporting, which are industry standard best practices. And then if you need to augment it natively, where you control how that API functions, and the tasks that it does, and just make that available in the library rather than being tied to open source plugins when you need a scale. So when you're small, it's not so important, but when you need to get big, it actually becomes a hindrance for you to actually move forward, because you can't manage all of them and know that they're all up to date with all the features. You kind of fall behind. I wanted to add that context.
I loved your example of having 400 controllers or masters spread across an organization, so you can see the scale of that issue, of that
$4.5
problem.
million. We spent $4.5 million on that on a yearly basis. Those 450 machines.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, it's big farms that are being managed. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt.
I was just gonna say, while we're talking, it ran through. I took the artifact build down to just build no unit testing, just to speed up the build. It's just a Docker Spring Boot application with Docker, a Docker image, just to speed things up. So because we lost some time due to the cluster going down, but it ran through, everything completed. And just for like a quick kind of what I'm talking about is, for example, if you use the open source Jenkins, like the Jira plugin for open source Jenkins, it doesn't really give you the ability to like update tickets, or sorry, create tickets and update tickets. It's more of the plugin itself is when you have a ticket, you can add stuff to the ticket you already have. Whereas I'm just using the straight API, which allows me to open a new ticket and then allows me to update that ticket just by using native API. So a Jenkins library that makes an API call for those functions, and I just have to call, create ticket or update ticket. And it handles all of that for me without having to rely on the plugin, which doesn't have that much functionality. I don't know if the CloudBees has a specific plugin for Jira, and it might have more functionality, but the open source one doesn't quite have that functionality.
It kind of goes to the fact of, if your world and your ITSM process is driven by releases, then you're going to need Jenkins to do that sort of stuff. And I find that's the more common use case. It's not about the ticket already exists. It's always been about that it creates the tickets, you get outputs, you validate, you approve, and then the process continues. So it was critical that we actually did that. But that's what happens. Plugins in those circumstances limit you. One, if there's enterprise ones, they're generally much more vast because they've built out that feature functionality for customers. The open source, they've done it for a reason, but the community is just building it out based on whim. And it's not always what you need. So we kind of blend both. It's nice to have a big portfolio of things that are available to you to get you integrated, but also then maintain using API calls because then you're not restricted by the plugin's persona or their story acceptance criteria that nowhere matched what you're looking for.
Fantastic.
Additional questions, or we could just keep looking at Matt's head. I can't stop sharing it. Any additional SME questions? They've been really good. All right, let's see here. We got a new one. Trying to pull mine up. My UI. Anybody else able to? There we go. Let me pull this up.
There's
a couple
question. Yeah, a couple came through.
Trying to open up my window here. Close the chat. That'll help. Okay, so what does CloudBees CI internally use to store credentials? What's your secret management, Sunil?
We actually integrate with CyberArk Vault. CloudBees CD itself has secrets management, credential management, but technically it's just authenticating against, whatever authentication or credentials management tool or system that you use today. So you still have to use some sort of integration.
I saw one about the best deployment. I can't see it. Oh, it's in my Q&A. Give me 1 sec. So if I integrate, do you see it, Matt? I can read it out.
Yeah, is it the one, what would be the best deployment model for CloudBees on AWS? Is that one you're talking about?
Yeah, I can't see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it says, yeah, go ahead.
No, so is the question, how would you deploy Jenkins on AWS?
Yeah, so what is the best deployment model for CloudBees Jenkins on AWS? EC2, ECS, or EKS?
EKS, most likely.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I was going to answer it and say EKS, but
there's a dead on, right? We are actually, we provide Helm charts to do those installations, and it's actually quite easy.
Yeah, and even going back to that too, so if you go to that model as well, so you could actually use, if you wanted to, I mean, ideally like Vault or something is the best thing, But even for my demo, the secrets were actually managed by Kubernetes. So the secrets I needed for my pipeline were all stored as Kubernetes secret. And then when the pods came up, the agent pods, I mounted the volumes with the secrets to those pods so that I could read the secrets from Kubernetes. But I have done with HashiCorp a Jenkins demo with Vault integration where all the secrets were called via Vault integration.
Yeah.
Additionally, we will make the recording session available and put out links for those that had to drop for incidences, as we had our own incident during the session, so incidences occur. We just did that one. Business wants to build the PCI and PII applications built in separate build nodes. How can that be achieved in a cost-effective manner with no additional operational overhead? So you want to have the isolation of the build environment because it builds artifacts that are used in a regulated environment, i.e. you're going to go into PCIs moving towards, what do they call it? SSF, Software Security Framework. So basically what they ask you is, are you building your artifacts in isolation with the right controls in place? What's our recommendation within the context of Jenkins or CloudBees to make sure that we can restrict particular environments to particular people and that they don't mix with others cost effectively without additional operational management overhead?
Well, I would say like dynamic agents, and you can assign dynamic agents from where they're running to. So for example, like I'm using Kubernetes agent, so I can specify like what namespace that agent runs in, what service account that agent has access to, and then in the pipeline, basically you just say when I run a step, you could say where this is going to run for that step, and then I believe there is. I'm not using any plugins, but I think there is plugins that allow only certain agents to be used for certain stuff, like natively, besides defining it in the pipeline, that like natively without a plugin, you would just define it in your pipeline. I don't know, does CloudBees have anything as far as role-based access for agents built in?
I believe the whole role-based access model has been revamped for the new version of CloudBees CI. See here, role-based access control. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing around more granular permissions and definitions, right? Much more robust for large-scale deployment. But it all depends on what you're talking about in terms of role-based access. Depends on what you're looking for, right? It's the roles, permissions, roles assigned to a specific group, users belonging to specific groups, and then assigning permissions to those groups, or going down to the masters folders and jobs and figuring out which group has what access to.
I would say the entire segmentation of in-scope nodes. So what happens is the build environment nowadays, once June, I think happens, SSF takes the place of PADSS. And what that means is you have to have secure software practices, and then there's no more PADSS applications. You can't do, you can't apply in that framework anymore. It's going to be the isolation of the supply chain. All of that is relevant now in the new PCI coming out. So I think the question is more about isolation of in-scope nodes based on who can access them, where do they run, and what artifacts do they access, just so that they can be segmented and audited to meet compliance requirements.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily do that if you're using like a Kubernetes-based setup, because you could restrict what service account the Jenkins is using and what namespace, and then only certain users would have access to provision within that namespace, which means you'd be segregating the agents via namespace. That's like, but that, I mean, I wouldn't say that's no additional operational overhead. Creating that structure using open source Jenkins is probably some additional operational overhead, but it would be cost effective because obviously the agents would be dynamic. So if the agents aren't there, you wouldn't be spending money on those.
Another question that came in basically is your SAML integrations. Do you have SAML integrations for like IAM providers like Okta?
Okta, yes.
Okay, so Okta's native, and then can you also does it also have the ability to store access logs? So if you're centralizing cross-domain and you're handling so many build farms, where do you send the logs of who did what across this?
So that's a good question. Each set of logs are specific to the master or controller that that those logs are being generated from. You can use shared file systems to centralize the logs, but they're still segmented by the controller that's generating those logs.
Does CloudBees have a way to collect all of those and send them somewhere for audit purposes?
Yeah, if you look at the larger picture around orchestration, I think you talked about that, Shlomo, earlier, was there's an orchestration layer, right, that fits above your entire DevOps tools, and that's the CloudBees CD product. You can actually send your entire set of logs for not only your benchmark platform, right, but also for your Jenkins logs, your SORAR-Cube, your security scans, etc., all to the CloudBees CD server. It stores those logs in, and as well as the metadata from these integrations that come in. So you can do the reporting, you can extract those logs, you can send them to people, upon failure, etc. So there is a way to do it, but that requires you to put that orchestration layer above your entire DevOps tool chain.
Got it. We really appreciate the questions. Don't hold back. We have 10 minutes remaining. If no further questions, we'll disband. But if anybody has any questions they'd like answered, just shoot them into the Q&A or into the chat window, and we'll put dialogue around it. Last opportunity to get answers without having to Google it. Let's see. We get another Q&A. There we go. Okay, what's the best way to version Docker images that are built when pipeline runs? I mean, we could do that tagging we could talk about. I am using pipeline build number to tag the Docker image and pushing that to the registry. Sometimes the image builds fine, but resulting service failures due to some programmatic error. The only downside I found to this method is to easily backtrack to the last image while built a running container. Could you shed some light on the practices you follow to versioning of Docker images and employing those to production? And you talk about the hash and the time and timestamp. You want to go with this one? You've designed this before for us, man.
Yeah. So, well, it depends on the full ecosystem, because you have to be able to correlate those tags dynamically to whatever mechanism you're deploying. But if I usually just use the get short hash, so the commit from Git, because it's unique. So the get short hash and the date and the time. That way I'm able to trace back directly from when was this built and what code was it built from. So it's easy to trace back. Now the problem with that, you have to use some other underlying mechanism for when you're doing your deployment. So if it's Docker and you're using Kubernetes, for example, you would have to have something where you could override that tag. So the easiest way for something like that is like Helm, because Helm you can set the tag via command line.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you could override, you create that tag in Jenkins and use that created tag in Jenkins to override the Helm chart deployment with that tag. So it's always unique to that deployment. So that deployment can always be traced back to that exact tag, and that tag would be carried forward through your whole deployment process, through all your environments until wherever you stopped with that environment, and then obviously you would get a new one if you started back over in dev. That way, if you had to, for example, for a question about PCI, if you had to show like how do you know what code is deployed when and from what, I mean, you literally say this is the git hash, right? So the git hash from that tag is literally the git commit for that code. So it's super easy to trace back.
You'll have to have that for SSF as they go forward, because they're going to validate that the software practices ensure that the right code goes and is validated into the production PCI environments, for example, or any environment. You really want to be able to know what you put in. So that's the unique variable that is solid going forward. Any additional questions? 4 minutes. All right, don't see any reds pop up. Thank you so much for attending. Hopefully we will send out the recording and some Git repos for you to use and try and improve your current situation. Hopefully you gathered insights on how CloudBees help you with cross-domain challenges or the life cycle of Jenkins itself being a challenge and how they help. And thanks so much, Matt, for putting that demo together. I know a lot of teams look at it as aspirational, but we're going to help them get there because that's what Benchmark does. We help organizations enhance their current CI/CD processes, whatever orchestrator they're using today. Thanks so much, and take care, everyone, and enjoy the nice weather outside.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.